Good morning, everybody. The Simple Handicap for Monday, September 2nd. Thank you for making me a part of your morning. And we are back for year number 7 of the podcast here on Apple and Spotify. And for the first time ever, streaming live on YouTube for the Sunday evening, Monday morning reaction shows where we will project all of the opening lines. I'll give my reaction to every side, every total, and we'll talk about everything that happened on the Sunday prior. Because this is a Sunday at the start of the season, we obviously don't have any games. There's nothing to react to in terms of what just happened. So we're going to talk about each and every game as we do here on the podcast every single morning through the first market rundown of the season. If you're joining the show for the first time ever, here's what you need to know. The Simple Handicap airs Monday through Friday mornings. You get to hear between 1 or 2 minutes per game. We talk about every team, every side, every total, every single morning, with the ultimate 15 minutes to keep you up to date with everything that you need to know going on in the NFL. If you've listened to the podcast a lot before, you know what happens every single morning, but you might be new to the first live YouTube streams for the podcast every Sunday night. We'll keep it as usual. You know, these podcasts go a little bit longer than usual, and these are some of the favorite shows for everybody every single week. So we're going to have some guest interaction for the first time ever, but this is still going to be podcast focused despite the Sunday evening, Monday morning episode streaming here on YouTube. Pretty amazing to get into year 7 on the podcast. It's been a testament to everybody listening. I see the reviews. I appreciate them all very much. It means a lot that everybody has continued to support the show through all these years and importantly, get a lot of value from it. So that's pretty fantastic and pretty special to see. So thank you, everybody, if you're coming back to the show for another season. And hopefully this one will be the biggest and best yet for the Simple Handicap. So with all that said, if you're excited, I'm excited. Let's get to it. The first market rundown of 2024. Here we go. Game number 1 kicks off Thursday night football in Kansas City with the Baltimore Ravens on the road at the Kansas City Chiefs. Number currently, Kansas City -3 for the most part across the board. We're looking at even money mostly at every single sports book with a couple exceptions. Pinnacle -2.5, -119. Otherwise, we're seeing 3 even money across the board for the Ravens and the Chiefs. Now, the total itself is sitting at 46. This was an opener of 46.5. So we're down half a point for the most part at the sports books that matter. We're seeing Bet Chris at 46, Circa at 46 as well. We're seeing a couple rogue 45.5s, but we'll call this 46 on the total, 3 even money on the side. Every time we've seen it creep up a little bit past this, there's been Ravens money. Every time it goes a little bit lower, we see Chiefs money coming back in. I think for the most part, we're going to be stuck in this window. When I look at this game, there's a clear reference point. Last year, these two teams played in the AFC Conference Championship, and that was a completely different line and a completely different scenario and a completely different situation. That number closed Baltimore -4.5. Believe it or not, that's where we were at when we were talking about this. That was 2-3 games ago in terms of NFL games we've seen played. So to go from 4.5 in Baltimore for the Ravens with the venue flip, both of which are obviously quite significant. Of course, you get a little bit of a bump for the playoff game to now the opener in Arrowhead. It's a pretty significant move. And when we look at market ratings from last year and where these two teams were, this game from market numbers was right around the pick'em last year at the end of the season. So there's a clear bump in favor of Kansas City. And when it comes down to evaluating this side, a couple things I think stand out. First of all, it's the Ravens offensive line downgrade. That'll be significant this year from last year. Number 2, it's going to be the Ravens defense downgrade. Historically great defense last year. You lose Mike McDonald, an all-time great defense coached under him, one of the most respected defensive coordinators in football. So that's going to be a downgrade too. For Kansas City, you look on both sides of the roster, they get better on offense. They add better wide receivers. They're going to have all of them except for Hollywood Brown in this game, which is the one notable injury really of week 1, especially when it pertains to this game. And defensively, you lose L'Jarius Sneed, but there's plenty of depth behind them. Kansas City certainly gets better in the offseason. Baltimore unquestionably gets worse. But now with this line move, has it gone too far is, I think, the question that you're looking at when it comes to handicapping this. In my opinion, I would lean towards the no, but it's a tough bet to make with the Chiefs now laying 3 points at home. You're kind of at the worst point of the number as we've looked through the whole summer up to now. So side right now, I think really becomes a question of has it gone too far? And I think we're going to see this kind of locked in right around 3. I would say the total itself has a little bit of movement potential, I would say, for the over. I don't think we're going to see it creep up a ton. But if we see this anywhere, we might see it creep up a half point, a point towards that 47. last year in the playoffs, this total closed 44.5. But it's to me, that Baltimore defense has taken a step back and will this season, and the Chiefs offense gets better. It's hard for me to justify a total lower than that, especially in a game like this with no weather. So I think we see this total kind of stay right around where it is as well. So this is a game that's pretty well locked in place. That's where we're at so far, with not too much to talk about on either side. As we get to Friday, the Brazil game, Friday Night Football. It's a fun week. Let's put it that way. Thursday Night Football, Friday Night Football, and we get a full slate Sunday. It's going to be a fantastic week to kick off the season. Brazil game, this game is going to be played on a neutral site, so take that obviously into consideration when you're thinking about these numbers. The Eagles are 2.5-point favorites, minus 120 across the board. And when we look at the total, the 48.5 has been really holding since open. We've seen a couple places show 49. Circa is currently showing it right now. Otherwise, we're still seeing those 48.5s shaded up. To me, when I look at this game from last year's numbers and where we were, there's obviously an upgrade for the total. Market numbers last year would have made the Eagles minus 1.5 on a neutral. Total would have been right at 47.5. So we're seeing a bump up for the total, and we're seeing a little bit of a bump up for the Eagles as well. Now, those market numbers are neutral numbers. So there is an upgrade for Philly in this when we're looking at this game. And I think we're going to see this touch 3 ultimately at some point earlier in this week. And then we're going to see where it goes from there. But when we think about the matchups between these two teams, Philadelphia upgrades offense and defensive coordinator, unquestionably. When you add Kellen Moore and you add Vic Fangio, the Philadelphia Eagles are going to be better this year than they were last year. Their rating overall is bumped up. That's an easy thing to look at and an easy thing to accept. So you're getting that bump up. The Green Bay Packers offensively had 2 different seasons last year. There was week 1 to 9 where they were figuring things out, and there was week 10 into the playoffs where they figured things out in a big way with Jordan Love and all those wide receivers exceeding expectations, one of the best offenses on the field. But defensively, I think there's a lot of question marks entering the season because Joe Barry is out, and in many ways that should be an upgrade for the Packers when you think about how soft of defensive coverage he played and how much he held that team back. Jeff Hafley comes in as the new defensive coordinator, but it's a defensive coordinator now for the Packers who not only is going through and introducing a massive scheme change, which players say that they like, playing a lot more aggressive, going to see a ton more cover 1 and man coverage usage. But the question is, does the leap from college to pro in week 1 have an immediate impact? And the market right now is saying no, because we're seeing the total bumped up about 2 full points, and we're seeing the Eagles bumped up maybe a little bit more than what they're deserving of being upgraded into. So as good as the Packers offense can be, there's still big questions about what this defense is, especially early in the season. And that's why we're seeing these numbers where they are with the Eagles upgraded a little bit in this matchup, and the total bumped up as well, about 2 full points from where we were on market last year. I think the Packers defense needs time to work out. And when we think about this matchup specifically on the Wednesday live stream, we'll really dive into it. But Jalen Hurts and the Eagles killed cover 1 until he couldn't run last year. And we saw an offensive coordinator unable to adjust in game to that. But that was typically what the Eagles really beat up. So you have a college coordinator coming into the league, making his debut as a pro. He runs a ton of that, loves to be aggressive, but the Eagles offense is really built to do that. And I think Kellen Moore has more than enough experience doing it, as well as enough weapons and his play design to beat that, especially now with the Eagles adding Dotson, and you have Barkley in addition to Brown and Smith. And so to me, this is going to be not really a great matchup for the Packers. And it's a double defensive coordinator debut with new teams, which tend to skew higher scoring. Defensive coordinators in their debut since the preseason change back in 2021, there's been 32 of them. The average allowance has been 23.5 points, which is above league average. But when defensive coordinators make their debut against top 10 offenses at the end of the year, they're conceding more than 30 points in those games. So you have 2 of those in this matchup. I'm as you can tell in my voice, I'm certainly leaning towards the over in this one. But I think this total, if not for that anchor of last year's market close and where we were at, if we were looking at this game played last year, would certainly be higher than 49. And we'd see this rivaling like a Rams-Lions game on Sunday Night Football with the higher total. In terms of the neutral field, I really don't have a lot to say on that one because it is a game that will be played on grass. Both of these teams in their home stadiums, back stateside, obviously play on grass as well. Officially now they're hybrids if you look into it, but it's not going to be a massive surface change with the offseason leading into this game and both teams having multiple weeks since the last preseason game. I don't think the travel scenario is going to be too cumbersome. It's not like a London game where you have the time zone effect, especially in season. So I'm not looking at that as a massive factor. And there's just nothing aside from kind of the shock and awe tweets people are trying to get reactions out of that really make me think one way or the other about this game. So to me, I'm looking at this total as one that can go up. And I think we'll see the side get to 3 and then a decision made past that. Let's move on to the Sunday card as we look at the Jags on the road at the Miami Dolphins. Miami, a 3-point favorite, -115 or -120 at the majority of sports books that matter on the board. We are seeing 3.5 at DK. We're seeing 3.5 at Pinnacle. ESPN Bet, which is a new name to the screen in the offseason. Bovado as well has got that 3.5. But for the most part, we'll call the Dolphins expensive 3-point favorites. When we're looking at the total, open 49.5. Only spot that is showing 50 anywhere on the board is Chris. Otherwise, we're looking at 49.5s across the screen. Interesting game as we have another defensive coordinator debut. Ryan Nielsen comes over from the Falcons. He is going to completely change the Jags defense from what they were last year into what they're going to be this year. So last year was a ton of cover 3, a ton of soft coverage for the Jags. It drove the fan base mad. It drove the coaching staff mad. That's where there's the switch. Ryan Nielsen's night and day. It's all man coverage. It's press. It's aggressive. But I don't think it works early in the season. All offseason, there was comments about how the install was behind. He was having an open depth chart, which is an interesting way of saying, I really don't know who our best players are, especially in the defensive backfield. That's not what you want to have coming into a week 1 game against the Miami Dolphins. And so we're seeing a total here very high at 49.5. When we look at where we were a year ago, market numbers would have made this game right around 46.5. It's a big bump. There's no question about it. But I think market fully anticipating this Dolphins offense having success. If there's a team you don't want to debut against as a defensive coordinator taking over the role for the new team, it's going to be Miami Dolphins. And so that's a tough spot for Nielsen in this Jags defense. Jacksonville say they want to throw the football a ton as well. And so there's this vertical passing game that we're hopefully going to see from the Jags, but there's new pieces involved in that too. And so I think that might lead to potentially a bit of a slower start. Miami offensively, they're hitting the ground at full speed. I mean, a lot of the guys return. You're hopefully going to have a lot healthier of an offensive line, certainly will to start the season than how you finished last year. All the weapons are there. I have no concerns about the Dolphins offense. The big question, what do we get from the Dolphins defense? Anthony Weaver steps in as the defensive coordinator. So just like Friday Night Football, we have this game where it's a matchup of 2 new defensive coordinators. Anthony Weaver comes over from Baltimore. Long term, there's a lot of optimism for this working in Miami. He's talking about letting Ramsey travel. Everything he's saying is great. The big change is going to be rather than trying to drop a ton of guys back and scheme up coverages up front, Weaver's just going to bring it. It's not going to be as schemed up as what Mike McDonald had. I don't think he has the pieces in Miami to do that, but that level of aggression is going to be much different for the Dolphins compared to what they had last year on the field, as well as the freedom in the secondary. The problem I see for Miami, they don't have the pass rushers back and healthy yet. Still multiple guys starting the season on the injured list. Of the 6 guys who had 5 or more sacks last year, only one of them is going to be on the field tonight. And so I think about the Dolphins totals last year, started off crazy at the start of the season. And then it got to the point where teams could just run the football on them because they had so many injuries in the front 7. Some of that carries over. Certainly the scheme that is coming in to change it is going to negate it to an extent. But this is a Dolphins defense with a lot of question marks to start the season, especially up front. And so when I'm looking at this total, it's a significant upgrade from where we were market number-wise at the end of last year to kind of where we were earlier in the summer even. This is a very big total, but all things point to this being a pretty wide-open game for both offenses. The only question is now, like, are you going to be willing to pay such a premium in week 1, trusting that those offenses work? Because this is certainly bumped up in a big way. So this number, about 3.5 to 4 points upgraded off market from where we were at the start of last season. We're looking at next game, the Pittsburgh Steelers on the road at the Atlanta Falcons. Atlanta, a 3-point favorite across the board. Total in this game, 42.5, up from 40.5 earlier today. We released the over in this game at 41. This number is now all the way up to 42.5. There were some 43s that showed briefly on the board. Those have now come back. So we're seeing from the opener at 43, there was a lot of under money that came in as there was uncertainty about the Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback scenario, what that offense was going to look like. I think there was expectation that Arthur Smith would be coming into the year once he was hired, very run heavy. And again, like you go through the preseason, I'm not going to stand here and say I'm super optimistic about the Steelers offense. I'm not. They resorted to running triple option in the second quarter of their preseason game with all starters against backups. The Pittsburgh Steelers offense was not going to be good this year. The question becomes when we look at this game with such a short total, are we expecting more of a bump from the Steelers relative to what they finished the year last year with, which was just an anemic bottom five offense? And to me, the answer would be yes. So there's optimism on that side. Defensively, the one area of concern for the Steelers is going to be in the defensive backfield when they're forced to defend 3 and 4 wide receiver sets. You have Porter Jr., who's by far and away the adamant cornerback number one. You have great safeties. But once you start testing the cornerback depth, that's where there becomes questions for the Steelers. And you look at the matchup against the Atlanta Falcons, Zach Robinson as the offensive coordinator comes from the Los Angeles Rams and the McVay scheme where what do they do on offense? They spread you out. They use 3 wide receivers at the highest rate. They're going to be able to test this Steelers defense. It's also going to be the Falcons who are introducing a much higher rate of passing into their offense. Last year, they were 32nd with Arthur Smith in pass rate over expectation. This year, they're probably going to be top 10. And if we think just kind of schedule-wise here, this is a Falcons team with a new staff that kind of desperately needs to win this game to start the season when you think about it, because they got the Eagles and the Chiefs on deck. If you're a new head coach, you have a new staff, and you're coming off of the season the Falcons had last year, this is the one game of the first 3 that you're favored to win and have a good chance to win. If you drop this one, you're starting the season 0-3 and there's a new staff. That's a disaster to be in after you spent that much money on a quarterback and you did whatever the hell they did in the draft with Penix. I mean, there is a ton of emphasis on at home for the Falcons to win this game. I think that's going to get that pass rate going a little bit sooner than later rather than them settling in. They can't afford to be conservative in this game. And so that is why the total has moved up as far as it has. And that is how the game is being looked at home right now for the Atlanta Falcons. Let's move on to game number 4. It is the Carolina Panthers on the road at the New Orleans Saints. This has been an interesting side in terms of movement. We saw this game get down earlier last week with bets coming in on the Saints. This game was sitting at 4.5. Got bet all the way down to 3.5. So there was money that came in on the Panthers. Then we saw that reverse, and we had Saints money come in late last week, and we've seen Saints money trickle in over the weekend as well. So what opened 4.5 for the Saints at home got down to 3.5 last week. We're now out to -5 at Chris even money, which is the highest price on the board. And you look at where these moves originated, could very well point to that move from 4.5 down to 3.5 being a fake. You could very well point to that Saints money at 3.5 and now again at 4 and 4.5 being true positions taken on New Orleans at home. Everywhere else on the board is 4.5, but when you see Chris leading the way on a side like this, especially at this time in the week relative to how far we are away from kickoff, pretty good indication of where all of these other books are going to end up moving. So I think there's a good chance we see all of those 4s that are currently on the board get taken out and go to 4.5. Wouldn't be surprised to see some of those 4.5 trickle up a little bit as well if Chris continues to hold at 5. The total in this game opened 40.5, and there was movement on that earlier today. As again, we were looking at the over for Panthers Saints, and that is now up to 41.5. Interesting game when we think about both of these teams and where they're standing. Market numbers last year wouldn't have made this game that much different from where it was earlier today. Market numbers would have had this at 39.5. This was sitting at 40.5. I have a hard time agreeing that that number shouldn't be justified to be pushed up a little bit further, because when we think about the Panthers, I think there's an inevitable offensive increase. Last year, they were the worst offense in football. couldn't score touchdowns, couldn't move the ball down the field. You bring in Dave Canales, you bring in Brad Idzik, you upgrade the wide receivers. The offense is going to be better. Defensively, the Panthers' defense is probably going to be worse. We see them take a step back. When you think about the pieces they lost in the off-season beyond Brian Burns, that's a big loss. Love their defensive coordinator, Evero, but he's got an uphill battle to climb to start the season. That's the Panthers. On the Saints side, you have an offensive change, finally. As it was getting beyond bizarre that Pete Carmichael was keeping his job as long as he was, when he was publicly saying that he didn't necessarily want the job to begin with. So you have the holdover OC from the Breeze era that was hanging on past Peyton leaving, now finally moved out of the way, and you bring in Clint Kubiak coming back to be an offensive coordinator. I think it bodes well for the Saints offense relative to what they were last year, not overall and relative to the league, but I think it sets them up early in the year to have more success compared to what they were a year ago. And there have been back and forths in the offseason about the install for Kubiak being behind schedule. I kind of buy into that a little bit, but now hearing that Shaheed is going to be good to go for week one, I think that's a pretty big benefit for the Saints. And so to me, this number was looking quite low, and that was where we're seeing that move up and still less than 42. I think it's an interesting over to look at in this game. Next game up is the New England Patriots on the road at the Cincinnati Bengals. Cincinnati, an 8.5-point favorite across the board at sportsbooks that matter, as we're looking at Chris, Circa, FanDuel, Pinnacle, Buckeye, all showing Cincinnati minus 8.5. The only 9.5s left on the board we found at DraftKings. You can also see a 9 over at BetOnline, minus 105, BetUS, and a few other offshores at 9, minus 105 as well. Looking at the total in this game, 42.5 was the opener. It is down as low as 40.5 currently, which is the number most seen across the board. We had a release on this at Right Angle Sports as well when we released the under earlier last week. When we were looking at this game, we saw a New England Patriots team that struggled the entire preseason, and that was starters struggling against third stringers. It was starters struggling against fourth stringers. Didn't matter who was defending New England. They had success doing it. I think the way that Mayo handled the quarterback decision last week was a little bit bizarre too. When you look at, he was kind of waffling back and forth between Brissett and May. The fact is, they don't have a starting quarterback at the moment. They're between both guys. They don't have weapons that can effectively get open. The run game is going to struggle behind offensive line injuries. And the only sign of positivity we saw at all from the Pats during the preseason and really the offseason overall was the defensive line. Now, that took a blow as well as you lose Christian Barmore to injury. Then Matthew Judon gets traded. And so what was looking like a unit that was going to play hard and be there for Mayo in the front seven now potentially has taken a step back too. And so it's really just a couple elite pieces on the Pats defensive side as individuals that are going to have to make up the majority of this defense. Is it enough against Cincinnati? Possibly. And I say that because the Bengals are still sorting things out with Jamar Chase. It sounds like a deal is going to be imminent. Maybe we get that later on Monday. Maybe it's earlier this week. It's still going to be the star wide receiver in a receiving group that had changed during the offseason, going through all of camp and missing all of these practices. Not what you want going into the season if you're Joe Burrow, finally getting your first full healthy offseason and first full training camp of your career. So a blow to the Bengals offense, I think, regardless if he signs and is there or not. But then also it's a Cincinnati Bengals offense that's going through a bit of an offensive change as well, with new offensive coordinator Dan Pitcher stepping in. There's going to be tweaks. There's going to be changes. And it's Lou Anarumo against Jacoby Brissett on the defensive side, which is a plus for the under. Anarumo obviously has experience coaching against him with his time in Cleveland, knows what he does well. I was actually looking at this game last week, and I was saying, look, if it's going to be Drake May starting, I think that probably poses more upside for the over. But if it's going to be Brissett starting, I think that tends to lend itself more to an under because of this matchup. And that's certainly what came to fruition. And we're seeing this number move down off of that release that we had last week on the under. Next game up is the Tennessee Titans on the road at the Chicago Bears. This number is currently sitting at Chicago minus 4.5, which is consistent across the board, but it is the total that is drawing a lot of interest. Open 43.5. It is now up to 45.5. This total was definitely on our short list to bet the over. There was a competing professional bettor that went and sent out the over for Titans-Bears last week and beat us to it. When you look at this, the explanation for the over and why there's optimism about points being scored in this game is pretty straightforward and pretty simple. The Tennessee Titans scheme change on offense, it's going to go from extremely run-heavy to extremely pass-heavy with Brian Callahan coming in. We just talked about the changes in the Bengals offense. That's driven by Callahan leaving Cincinnati and coming over to Tennessee. The Titans last year, extremely run-heavy. That was Mike Vrabel. That's what he wanted from the offense. All of that is gone. So you're going to get a ton of passing from Tennessee. You're going to get a lot of room for Will Levis to air it out. DeAndre Hopkins' status in doubt for this game, but everything that they showed in preseason is all going to be driven by the pass. So you have a big scheme change for the Titans. Chicago with Caleb Williams showing more of the same. And everything we saw in the preseason passed the eye test, and you upgrade at weapons with Keenan Allen coming in. You get Rome Odunze from the draft. You have DJ Moore. I mean, this Bears offense is going to be better than what they were last year, as will the Titans defense. And you look at where this number was last year on market ratings, it was at a 41. And so when you see that pro come out and bet the over at 43.5, it makes sense because this number was not adjusted up enough for how both of these offenses are going to change from last year into this year. And that's why we're seeing that number move up to where it is, sitting at 45.5. Next game on the board is the Arizona Cardinals on the road across the country taking on the Buffalo Bills. This number opened Buffalo -7. It is now down to Buffalo -6 with a couple 5.5s beginning to show. The total in this game opened 48. It is still sitting at 48, but shaded towards the over. Interesting game because Buffalo has lost a lot in the offseason. You lose Diggs, you lose Gabe Davis, you go through a mini coordinator shift in terms of how they handled it mid-season. Now with the full offseason, Brady driving the way. What we're going to see the Bills offense turn into is a lot more ball control, a lot more traditional ground game. There's going to be a lot more two tight end usage. It's going to be heavier personnel. They're trying to go a different direction with this offense. And so when you think about the Bills totals, you have to take that into account, especially early in the season. This matchup specifically against a defense as bad as Arizona is going to allow Buffalo to really do whatever they want. And I do think there's going to be an emphasis on that ball control element early in the season that Buffalo is going to be able to exploit. And so that tightens things up a little bit here. On the other side for Arizona, they want to do the same thing on offense. There's a very clear identity for the Cardinals this season. They want to be physical. They want to run the ball. They have a very run blocking heavy and run blocking skewed offensive line that they want to run behind with their multiple backs. What's going to happen in Arizona is they're going to be forced into passing and they're going to be electric and score a ton of points because of it. But at its core, the Cardinals want to run the football. So this game's a really hard one to bet because you have two teams that want to run it and two teams that want to possess the football. One, because it's their identity and what they want to do, and another because they're protecting their defense. And in this matchup, it's really going to be a matter of if the Bills score quickly off the start, then we're going to see the Cardinals forced to play catch up. And with the Bills injuries now to Matt Milano and the Bills injuries in their secondary and departures in the secondary in the offseason and changing, I think Arizona, if they're forced to play catch and chase, they're going to be able to score points and they're going to be able to keep up with Buffalo. But on the other side, if it starts the other way and you have the Arizona Cardinals get out to an early lead, maybe they get that shock touchdown. Well, the Arizona Cardinals aren't stopping anybody. And so it's a matter of like looking at this game, and I see the total at 48.5 and market numbers last year made it 47.5. And on one side, I'm looking at it and I'm like, both of these teams want to run, and it's going to take just one long stalled drive in the red zone to kill this over. But on the other side, if you get a quick score or two, this game is flying over the 48.5. So it's a tricky one to bet on the total. The side has come down because Arizona is just becoming a popular team among pros, and there's intrigue in buying them. And like I said, we saw the injury to Milano on Buffalo, which is a killer, and the offense is going to take on a different identity that's less intriguing to back when laying this big of a margin, even if it is at home against a bad defense like Arizona. The way that the Bills offense is set up just isn't necessarily conducive to cover massive numbers comfortably. Again, like if we're going to watch the Bills get up 13, 17 points late in games and just go super run heavy and control the ball. And that's the way they're going to run out games when you're laying that big of a number, especially against a chase team like Arizona that's going to be able to move the football. That's a tough task to do. And so we're going to see Arizona not only this week, but future weeks as well. When they're getting 6, 7, 8 points, they're just going to be blindly backed because of how good they are going to be chasing deficits. And that's kind of what we're seeing in this spot right now as this number creeps in with the Cardinals taking money as an underdog. So the 7s are gone. Some 6s still remain, but those 6s could very well turn into 5.5s. And at that point, you're going to see a difference of opinion. But certainly the Cardinals have been an intriguing team for a lot of pros so far. Next game on the rotation is the Houston Texans on the road at the Indianapolis Colts. Houston, a 2.5-point favorite across the board, and this is a number that's been slowly ticking up for the last 6 or 7 days. Every morning I open the screen and I look at it, and it's just a little bit more incremental, moving towards Houston. Haven't seen a 3 hit the board yet. I'm confident if there is a 3, we're going to see Colts money come in. Houston's loaded. We know that when we look at the market numbers for these teams. Last year, we were looking at the Colts on the market minus 2-point favorites. So now with this being in Indy, and you're seeing all of the upgrades for Houston with the offseason additions, this game now at 2.5 would be signaling Houston 3.5. You could even make a case for 4 on a neutral. So, I mean, we're talking about a significant move from where we were last year to where we are now. And Indy was competitive in that final game down the stretch with Gardner Minshew, with backups playing other positions, right? So this is a huge move in favor of the Houston Texans, justified because of all the offseason additions and how stacked this roster is on both sides of the football. But it may not seem like it at 2.5, but this is a huge number for Indy or Houston to be laying on the road at Indy. Something that I think was interesting, if you were listening to preseason podcasts, was Stephanie Stradley for the Texans. Wasn't my favorite episode, I'll say that, but something that she mentioned in her big preview, and I pressed her a little bit on the podcast, and she told me offline as well, kind of expanded on it further. Anytime D'Amico Ryans has been pressed about his run defense in the offseason, he's been very defensive in press conferences, in one-on-one interviews with reporters and people around the team. When I look at Indy in the preseason, the big clip is the Richardson interception. And it's, oh, here we go, Anthony Richardson coming from college. He can't throw the ball. He can't complete passes. He's inaccurate. What I think was missed from that was the first drive they actually ran the Shane Steichen offense and what he wants to do. The rest of the drives were set up mock drives against the defense to test Richardson in uncomfortable situations. The Colts are going to be able to run the football on Houston and anybody in the league. The Colts might end up with the most dynamic rushing attack when you have Richardson and Taylor on the field together. I look at the Texans' middle of that defense as being extremely vulnerable. So to me, the Colts off the start of this game are going to get whatever they want offensively. The problem for Indy comes if the Texans get out to a big lead early, maybe they get up 10-0, 14-0, it's going to be hard for the Colts to play catch up and come back. But if Indy can get out and dictate this game, I don't know if the Texans are going to be able to stop this run game of Shane Steichen. It's a very interesting matchup. It's going to go a long way to dictating this handicap, but a very big move relative to where we were at the end of last year to where we are now in favor of the Houston Texans that I don't necessarily fully agree with. And so I'm going to be curious to see if this gets to 3 or not. Before we get into the afternoon games, I want to remind everybody there's more than 100 watching on YouTube at 12:20 a.m. Eastern time, 9:20 p.m. Pacific time. If you're watching this, these episodes air every single morning on the Simple Handicap podcast feed on Apple or Spotify. So if you're listening on YouTube or you're watching this after the fact, you can follow the shows every morning. These Sunday night episodes will air live on YouTube like this. There'll be reactionary episodes, but again, we have nothing to react to. So we're talking about these games a little bit more in detail than we do. Typical episodes of the podcast, 10 to 15 minutes every morning. Start your day at 5 a.m. Pacific. You'll have the podcast 5 a.m. Eastern. I'm getting my time zones mixed up. 2 a.m. Pacific, 5 a.m. Eastern. Sets you up for your day. Everything you need to know. Every team, every game, every day. Injuries, weather, news, opinions, bets from others. Everything that you need to know to set you up for your day. So if you're listening to this or you're watching the YouTube video after and you don't already listen to the podcast, Those short episodes will upload every single morning now through the Super Bowl, and then we'll have a long one like this on YouTube here every Sunday after the afternoon games finish. I typically go live around 4:15 p.m. Pacific. So these live streams will air every Sunday afternoon. So that's what you have to look forward to. Subscribe button is down below. And if you're enjoying the episode, you can give it the thumbs up as well. If you're watching on Apple or Spotify, well, you would know what to do already. There's the rating down below. If you have a second, hit pause on your phone, scroll down, leave the comment, leave the review. I appreciate it very much. Here we go to the afternoon games on Sunday. Las Vegas on the road at the LA Chargers. This is currently Los Angeles -3, -115. We're seeing 3.5s at a few sports books as well. 3 -20 at Chris, 3.5 -105 at Circa. Total in this game from 43.5 down to 41. When we look at where we were market ratings wise last year, the LA Chargers ended the year, they would have been a 5.5 point favorite on a neutral. Big difference to where we are now. Tons of changes for the Chargers. A ton of roster turnover. You have Harbaugh coming in as the head coach. You have new coordinators. It is the debut game for both of them. I think a couple interesting questions. First of all, is this a home game for the Chargers or the Raiders? Normally, game played in Los Angeles, it's going to be 85-90% Raiders fans. Like, it's overwhelmingly a Raiders city. Nobody goes out to support the Chargers. We all know that. That's not new news. However, if there was maybe ever a game where you're going to get Chargers fan support, it's for Harbaugh, it's for the new staff, it's for the new regime, it's Justin Herbert coming back off injury. This game probably draws out as many Chargers fans for LA at home as we've ever seen Chargers fans show up for an LA game. And so I think that neutralizes the scales a little bit versus what would typically be a big Raiders crowd, maybe a little bit evened out. There's a lot to look forward to as a Chargers fan this season. There's also a question of what are we looking at the quarterback scenario for the Raiders with Gardner Minshew getting the starting job? I don't know how many people agree with that decision. Was he actually the better quarterback that we saw? I don't know if I agree with that. I thought Aidan O'Connell at times certainly looked better. And so how do you handle that from a pricing standpoint? There's also kind of the big revenge angle that lingers over this. Now, I know a lot of players have moved on from the game last December, but Antonio Pierce came out at halftime in the game that the Raiders hung 63 points on the Chargers, and his halftime comment about keeping the foot on the gas and wanting to blow out the Chargers in that game, I would have to think resonates a little bit with the Chargers at home in this spot, looking back on the revenge angle from that game and that beating that they suffered a year ago. So that's going to linger as well here among division rivals. So an interesting game with the Chargers currently sitting as 3.5 point favorites. That total has come down. Part of that due, again, to the quarterback decision. There's also a bit of uncertainty with Justin Herbert. There's also just a Chargers team that is lacking so many weapons that they had a year ago that we just don't know what to do with. And it's like, how do you end up putting a good price on Ladd McConkey, a rookie slot wide receiver that's likely going to be number one? We don't know running back wise, health conditions. Both guys that are going to get major share of touches out of the backfield for the Chargers are coming off significant injuries a year ago. So it's a lot of question marks on the Chargers offense, certainly, to go along with that Raiders uncertainty that is bringing this total down from 43.5 coming in lower. Next game up on the board is the Washington Commanders on the road at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Point spread in this game, Tampa Bay a 3.5 point favorite across the board. Total in this game from 41.5 all the way up to 44 is the high number seeing on the market right now, with some 43.5 shaded over mixed in. We talked about competition among professional bettors last week. Again, this game was taken. It was one that was definitely on our short list as we were looking at this. Over was sent out by another professional betting group. That drove the number up, which at the time was 42, has pushed it all the way up to 44.5 before we've seen some buyback on the other side of 44 bring this number down. So a bit of a jumping in line, but I thought that was a good bet made by that group. When you look at both of these teams, Washington last year played with a ton of pace, but it was Sam Howell, and it was Sam Howell taking a ton of sacks. It was Sam Howell turning the ball over. There wasn't a lot of efficiency to go along with that pace that Washington had. This year, Cliff Kingsbury is in as the new offensive coordinator. Dan Quinn is in as the new head coach. That pace is certainly going to stick around, but I think efficiency is going to couple it to make the Commanders a better offense than what they were a year ago. Typically, when you see an outlier season like that for pace, you expect a drop-off. I just don't think that's going to be the case with Washington. I think Kingsbury is still going to push the tempo with Daniels. We're going to see things spread out a little bit more than they were in the preseason. And Kingsbury even said, like, we didn't show a lot of our offense in the preseason. It's going to be different in the regular season. And so what I think that means is maybe Daniels is allowed to hold on to the ball a little bit longer. He was holding on to it for about 1.7 seconds in the preseason. He's going to have a little bit more time. It's going to be a little bit more deep ball passing. And against the Buccaneers secondary that has some turnover, I think that's going to matter. Then you have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers bringing back essentially everybody on offense, with the one addition being Jalen McMillan, who is becoming the fantasy football darling of August and September, as everybody seems to be talking about his presence as wide receiver number 3. Godwin will be moved back to the slot. Mike Evans will be wide receiver number 1. Liam Cohen is in from a LA Rams system, which utilized a ton of 3 wide receiver sets. So this is going to be the Buccaneers continuing on from what they did a year ago, but now you just have a much more effective wide receiver 3, and Godwin is back in the slot. Going to be very difficult for Washington to defend. Preseason grades have the Commanders secondary as the worst unit in football, specifically at the cornerback spot. And so this, to me, when we're looking at market numbers from a year ago, this market total last year at the end of the year was 41.5. That group sent out over 42. You were essentially looking at the same number, but you're looking at a Commanders offense that will be better, and a Buccaneers offense that is, if they're lucky, going to play to the same level as last year, which was 12th, but they get a matchup here schematically that sets up pretty well for them to move the football. And so that's why we saw, I believe, that bet made by that other group earlier last week, and that's why we saw this total move up and why we're seeing it sit currently at 44. Next game on the board is the Denver Broncos on the road at the Seattle Seahawks. Seattle is a 5.5-point favorite, minus 115 at Chris. We're seeing 5.5 minus 15 at FanDuel, Pinnacle as well. And then we're seeing 6s at Circa. We're seeing a 6 at DK. We're seeing a 6 at BetOnline as well for the Seattle Seahawks. This was a game that opened Seattle minus 4.5. So we have seen one-way action on the side with Seattle being pushed up. In regards to the total, 42.5 has come in. We're looking at 42 as the consensus number across the board, with a couple 41.5 showing. To me, this is a matchup that is going to be completely dictated by Mike McDonald and the Seahawks defense against Bo Nix and the Denver Broncos offense. Denver is going to be much more of an under team this year on offense than they will be an over team. It's going to be run, run, pass, run, run, pass, run, run, pass as much as they can. Denver spent a ton on the offensive line. They have a deep roster of running backs that are going to rotate through. They want to run the football. I don't think many teams are going to have success running the football on Seattle. Great interior defensive line, and you have Mike McDonald now leading the way as the head coach, overseeing the defense. He comes from Baltimore, as we talked about earlier in the episode, and brings with him the pedigree that offensive coordinators around the league just hate to go up and match up against. And so it's going to be a little bit different in Seattle with pieces and weapons, but Seattle in the interior of that D-line is just loaded. And then the way he's going to use secondary pieces just become a very tough matchup. And now Denver has moved on from Patrick. It's just a weird offense. And it's Bo Nix as a rookie going into Lumen. Like, that is as bad of a spot as it gets. You're talking about home field advantage being added onto this number. Certainly so. Now, all of that, again, as we're talking about, comes with a premium, right? As we're looking at last year, market numbers at the end of the year would have made Seattle a 3-point favorite. We're now up to 6. So all of that optimism I'm talking about with the Seahawks defense, the coaching upgrade, how much better it's going to be, the rookie quarterback for Denver coming into this spot, Denver wanting to be a run, pass team, being forced into this bad matchup, that's being more than priced in to this number, and you're looking at it, it's just a bit of a premium. If it gets to 7, I guarantee there's going to be Denver money coming back the other way. And so it's a matter of looking at Seattle as like I want to bet on this team, but do I want to pay like an extra premium to do so because I'm buying into that defense and I'm just fading Bo Nix? I could make the case for it, but it's a very, very difficult bet to make. But there's no way that I could touch Denver in this spot unless you're giving me 7. And even then, I still might be leaning towards Seattle in this matchup. I just think it skews that much towards the Seahawks. Next game up is the Dallas Cowboys on the road at the Cleveland Browns. Cleveland opened a 1-point favorite back in the summer. It is out to 2.5 minus 115 across the board with a 120 showing as well at an offshore book. I think this one is definitely headed towards 3. If we get there, I think we'll absolutely see some Cowboys money coming back. Total in this game, 44.5. It has now been bet down to 42. Now, this to me is the hardest game on the board to handicap, the hardest game on the board to project. When we're looking at where we were market ratings-wise last year, at the end of the year, Cleveland minus 0.5 point. So there's definitely a bit of a premium being put on Cleveland. I think it's easy to see why. You have the Dallas Cowboys did nothing in the offseason. They got worse on offense, in my opinion, with the offensive line taking a step back. There's no longer going to be any sort of reliable run game out of the backfield. And you didn't go out of your way to add any wide receivers if you're Cowboys staff. And so kind of know what you're getting in Dallas, but I think it's like a watered-down version of the Cowboys coming in. You also lose Deron Bland out of the defensive secondary. So that unit's going to take a bit of a blow as well, going on the road to play at Cleveland. But for the Browns, there's a lot of question marks as well. We're still waiting for official statuses of both starting tackles for Cleveland. Deshaun Watson had arm soreness. Was that an excuse for him not to participate in preseason despite not being injured? Don't know what we're getting out of that. We know that Nick Chubb will not be back for week 1. That's a non-impact for this line because expectations were that he wasn't going to be there. But you now have a bit of uncertainty about what exactly this Cleveland Browns offense is. Now, we know the defense is going to be elite at all levels. This is going to be one of the best defenses in football again. So if the Cowboys can't run the football and the Cowboys passing attack goes through CeeDee Lamb and Ferguson, but you have the Browns matching up with Ferguson and Lamb missing all of the offseason, who, if he comes in ready to go, great. But I think that that's maybe asking a bit much, is the main weapon matched up against these great corners. To me, this just screams bad matchup everywhere for the Cowboys. But if you're looking at backing the Browns in this game, like, what are you betting into on offense? I think that's another tough case to make. And so for me, kind of stuck in between with this. I don't really have an opinion on where this goes. I don't really have an opinion side or total either. This is a tough game. There's certainly been sentiment supporting the Browns. The one thing that I would say with the level of confidence is, hey, if you see this at 3, I would be certain that there's going to be Cowboys money coming back in unless there's some crazy news that is going to drive that in. So that's kind of where we're looking at this number locked in. Let's go to Sunday Night Football. Rematch again from the playoffs. This one's going to be great. It's the LA Rams on the road at the Detroit Lions. Lions laying 3.5 points, minus 105. Total in this game, 50.5 across the board, with a few books showing 51. Chris is showing 51, shaded to the over. FanDuel 51.5, heavily shaded to the under. 50.5 at Circa. A bit of a split between the sharpest books on the board at 50.5 and 51. When we look at market numbers for this game last year, Lions end of year market number would have been -6. Believe it or not, that high. The market was never super high on the Rams. A lot of those preseason expectations baked in, and the market total would have been 48.5. And so there's been a bit of a premium bumped up to the over on this game, about 2 full points. And we're seeing this game, again, those market numbers last year for where they were, a little bit inflated towards the Lions towards the end of last year. Coming into this year, we're seeing a bit of a reset in that. Now, this game closed last year at 3 in this game. We're seeing it bumped up a little bit for the Lions. When you look at the box score for that game, the Rams outgained the Lions by 1.7 yards per play. The difference in the game was the Rams in the red zone. They went 0 for 3, was a bit of a quirky 3 drives for them inside the Lions 10 when they got to. And so you can look at that game both ways, but you can also look at this game from a different perspective and say, okay, the Lions have the best offensive line in football. The Lions are going to be able to do whatever they want running the football. And now the Rams have a big problem because there's no more Aaron Donald on the defensive line. And if you take him out of the equation, you are now freeing up offensive lines in just a major way to attack this Rams defense, which has never been great in the McVay era defending the run. So you're thinking about what the Lions want to do as a primary option on offense. They're getting that all game long. Defensively for the Lions, they bolstered their run defense, which the Rams certainly want to do. And we're going to see a bit of a shift in the Rams philosophy as they're still going to sit in 11 personnel, but this offense has made it very clear based on their offensive line additions, especially in the interior, left guard, center, and right guard, and how they added guys and shuffled guys around. The Rams are going to run the football a ton, and the Rams want to be very physical. They want to run this duo look where they're relying on wide receivers to block. They're relying on that 1,000 pounds a man, as it's referred to, in the middle of that offensive line. But now you have a Lions defensive line that is going to be better at stopping the run. So the question really is, are the Rams going to have success against the Lions' young corners, where they added 2 rookies, shifting things around? You have Carlton Davis now back there. This is a much better Lions secondary coming into this year. Do the Rams have success throwing it against that? Because I don't think the Rams have as much success running as they did in that playoff game. And then on the other side, how are the Rams going to come up with anything to stop what the Lions want to do on offense? And so this is going to be a game that I think is really dictated by the Lions O-line up front. And we're going to see just how big of a residual impact will Aaron Donald have. It's been a long time since we've seen a defensive player of his caliber retire and leave a team. And the Rams just did not do, I mean, he's an irreplaceable guy, but the Rams certainly didn't do anywhere close to enough to give you any sense of hope that they're going to have any type of strength or continuity in the middle of that defensive line. So that's pretty problematic. So I think the Lions' slight bump up here relative to where we closed last year is certainly justified. I know Rams money is coming back into the market over the last 3 to 4 days. This was a consensus flat 3.5, and now we're heading back towards 3. If this gets back to -3 for Detroit, the Lions will absolutely be bet. Let's see how far the Rams money continues to push this one in. Then we go to Monday Night Football. It is the San Francisco 49ers hosting the New York Jets. San Francisco opened a 6-point favorite. They're now 3.5 -115 at Chris, 3.5 -110 at Circa, 3.5 -105 showing for the most part across the board at every other book. The total in this game from 45.5 now down to a flat 43. At one book, we're seeing 43.5 as the main number for this game across the board. So this move down has happened within the last week. For the most part, this was holding around 5.5, 6 for the majority of the summer. And then really since the 49ers Raiders preseason game, we've seen Jets money come into the market. There's a few things driving this. First of all, what is the status of Trent Williams? Is he going to be on the field? If he is not, we're looking at a 49ers team that last year played like 2.85 games without him. They scored 17 points in each game. It was their lowest offensive outputs of any games that they had last year. Trent Williams drives this offensive line. He also is a massive contributing factor to what this offense can do. If we kind of just dive in a little bit deeper on that and think about it, so there's certainly noise in those numbers, but it's hard to ignore that they were the 3 lowest offensive outputs. But when you add in the fact that left guard Aaron Banks is dealing with an injury, and you also watch what the 49ers offensive line did with starters without Williams in the preseason game against Raiders backups, Las Vegas backups lived in the backfield for the duration of the time that they were on the field, which was more than a quarter against the Niners in that game where Purdy was playing with starters. I mean, the 49ers offensive line couldn't block anybody. And so if Williams is not on the field and you have a potential injury to Banks at left guard, you're dealing with an offensive line that couldn't stop Raiders backups now going against the Jets defense, which was a top 5 unit in the NFL last year that is loaded on defensive line. That's a bad matchup for San Francisco that is going to cripple this offense. Defensively, in that same Raiders game, you saw 2 defensive line starters for the 49ers go down on the same drive. So we don't know what the status of Leonard Floyd is. We don't know what the status of Gross Matos is. Those are 2 guys you have to watch. In addition to Trent Williams, in addition to Aaron Banks, it seems more unlikely than likely than Hufanga starting week 1 for the Niners in this game. So that would be a big blow at strong safety because there was optimism that he would be ready to go for week 1. all of a sudden the 49ers are dealing with injuries at key spots. And then over the weekend, bit of an unfortunate and semi-tragic accident with rookie Ricky Pearsall getting shot in an armed robbery in San Francisco. So I'm very well assuming that after being shot in the chest, you're not going to be able to turn around and play on 7 days. So you would have to think that he is going to miss this game, undoubtedly. And you also have Juwan Jennings that's less than 100%. So all of the sudden, there's injuries all over for the 49ers. And there's a key holdout with Williams. Whereas on the other side of the ball, you have the New York Jets that have the Hassan Reddick mess going on that is very unlikely to be resolved. But other than that, it's a Jets offense that remained healthy and gets the benefit of having Mike Williams back as a surprise addition. There was expectations about 2-3 weeks ago that he might start on the PUP. That's no longer the case. He's going to be good to go week 1, snaps managed, but still an offseason addition at wide receiver added on as a bit of a surprise. Everyone else gets through healthy, and you have a defense that's ready to go. So if they're able to steal the Reddick stuff, which I don't think is factoring into this number because he was never in a spot where that contract was settled, nor was it necessarily expected to be once these numbers were widely available and started moving. So I don't think that was dictating much. But like at that point, that would kind of be a bonus to this number. So it's a bit of a mess to make of. It makes sense why the total is coming down with the 49ers offensive injuries. But to me, I'm looking at this side. So it's 3.5. And if we just go off market numbers last year, which are hard to get to, the San Francisco 49ers, based on market numbers at the end of last year, would have been 14-point favorites. So there's obviously the 3. I mean, a massive upgrade for the Jets, right? But it's a completely different team and a completely different scenario this year. Let's just think about it as kind of a brand new spot when we're looking at 6 to 3.5. If Williams plays and he is out there and they sort that out, this number will creep back towards San Francisco. Williams is worth, in my opinion, a point a game. So that's going to matter. That's going to go a very long way. So that would push the number back towards San Francisco. If Reddick somehow works it out and he's going to play some percentage of snaps, I don't think it's doing anything to the line at this point. So to me, it's like a new number and a new game and a new market at 3.5, where you're betting the Niners if you think Williams is going to get sorted out and be on the field. And you're really, in my opinion, probably kind of hard-pressed to find a way in to back the Jets at this number after the move, unless you think Williams doesn't go. And what showed on the field in the preseason game against the Raiders is going to translate onto the field for 4 quarters against this Jets defense. But just like taking a step back from it, this game means so much more to the Jets than it does to the 49ers that you never want to say there's a motivational factor in a regular season game necessarily that gives you a significant advantage over the market, because it's the NFL in the regular season, week 1. It's tough to find. But, I mean, you need Rodgers to win this game for the Jets and to get out with a win, because the schedule after this for New York, they can legitimately run into week 8 as a 7-1 football team if they get past this. I mean, the schedule they have upcoming is so easy. Like, this is the spot circled for New York, and this has really become a game where the 49ers are just trying to basically survive it with all the injuries and the issues that they have on both sides of the football. And so that's kind of how we're looking at this game, and it's kind of a tough game to look at now after the move with where it's sitting at, but certainly an interesting market that has completely been driven by player news on the 49ers side up to this point. That's it. 58 minutes. I think it's the longest Sunday episode ever in the history of the Simple Handicap. But again, there's a lot to talk about. A lot of these games are fantastic this season. Again, appreciate everybody for stopping by. If you're watching this live on the YouTube stream, and if you're back on Apple and Spotify on the podcast feed, damn, it's good to have everybody back for another football season. I'm glad to have you all with me. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe and give a thumbs up. If you're listening, I have to get these watch and listens right as I go. It's the first time I've done this with the live simulcast. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please be sure to pause the podcast if you have a second this morning. Scroll down, leave a rating for the show. If you have an extra second or two, leave a comment on the review side of things. If you're listening on an iPhone or an Apple device, if you're on Spotify, you can hit the star button. But I appreciate it very much. It helps me with the charts. It helps the show get more awareness as well. and your help on YouTube goes a very long way. In terms of what is coming up next this week, there's a lot. Wednesday morning live stream on the RAS Picks YouTube channel, 9 a.m. Of course, you'll have daily episodes of the podcast feed every morning at 5 a.m. Eastern, 2 a.m. Pacific now through the Super Bowl, Monday to Friday. We will have Follow the Money moving now to Friday afternoons. I believe my time will be 3 p.m. Pacific over on VSiN. We have a Sunday morning release show on the RAS Picks YouTube channel. And then, of course, the live stream reactions on Sunday, which we'll upload here on the podcast feed as well. So there's a lot of football content to come. I appreciate everybody being here along the way. And again, if you're liking all the content, please like, subscribe, or leave a review on the podcast feed. That's it for me. Have a fantastic Monday, everybody. We'll talk to you again bright and early on the podcast feed Tuesday morning.